everyone. I am so glad you're here tonight. My name is Emily. I am here from AADL for one of my very favorite things, which is Nerd Nite. Ooh, yes, Nerd Nite deserves cheers. I'll tell you, because we're at Top of the Park and we're very excited, this does mean it's going to be just a tick different from our average Nerd Nite. So I see some of our Nerd Nite regulars here. I'm so glad you came here. Thank you. But I know we've got some new folks too. So if you get the Nerd Nite fever tonight, know that typically we're held at a bar on the second Wednesday of the month. We jump around from location to location. So next month we'll be at York. You'll hear more about that later. But because we are in this tent, that does mean we do not have drinks tonight. But the good news is that after we're done, there's a social tent right over there that you can get one. And we're going to compress Nerd Nite just a little bit because normally we take a few breaks so that folks can refresh those beverages. And we're just going to put all the breaks right at the very end. So then you can go get your drinks at the end of the night. But since we do have new faces here, and since we've been told by our regular folks that they miss it if we don't tell it, we've got to let you know about Nerd Nite's origin story. Because every good nerdy something has an origin story. And ours starts with this guy named Chris. Chris imagine here, we are in the early to mid 2000s. Chris is a graduate student, which means in addition to doing his studies, Chris spends a lot of time at a bar, and his regular bar was the Midway, which is in Jamaica Plains in Boston. And Chris would go there every night and drink because he was a grad student. But because he was a grad student, he also had to do this thing called research. And so every fall, Chris would travel to Cameroon to study the indigo bird. Look at this little sweetie. Isn't he so cute? But then look a little closer. Doesn't that eye just look a little bit devious? Well, listen to the eye, because the indigo bird is a parasitic killer. What happens when it's time for Mama Indigo Bird to lay her eggs? She goes into another bird's nest and lays her egg among all the other mama birds' nests and then hightails it. And then when the indigo bird is born, instead of living happily with its adopted brothers and sisters, it savagely kills them, eats the eggs, shoves what's there left out of the nest, and poor adopted mother, Mama Bird, knows none of the better and raises the indigo bird as its own, and it continues on. And that is why people like this guy, Chris, studies it. So when he gets back from his trip, he goes back and he's like, oh my gosh, I've really missed being here at the Midway. And so every night he's sitting there at the bar with different friends catching up. And as you do when you are catching up with friends, you talk about the cool parasitic bird you've been studying. And so he tells the story of the indigo bird night after night to different friends and the same bartender. And at some point, the bartender says, Chris, we've had enough. I'm so sick and tired of hearing about this jerk indigo bird. So here's what you got to do. Pick one night. Invite all your friends to the Midway and tell the story for one grand last time. And so that's what Chris did. And the bar filled. And then they thought, hey, this is kind of a good idea. We don't want to hear about the indigo bird anymore, but maybe we should do this every night. And thus, the concept of Nerd Nite was born. And then Chris was talking to his buddy Matt, who lived in New York. And Matt hosted a trivia night, and Chris said, hey, you should do this Nerd Nite thing. And Matt listened, and Nerd Nite grew. And now it takes place across the country, across the world, including right here in Ann Arbor. And we're really lucky because in Ann Arbor, it's brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library, which means it's a great thing. It means no cover charges. And it also means if you're here in the summertime, it means a summer game code. I am not going to spend the time explaining summer game to y'all right now if you don't know what it is, but I'm really enthusiastic about it. So talk to me afterwards, and I will talk to you as long as you're willing to listen about it. But if you are a player, here's your code, nerds the word. Write it down, text it in, get those 150 points. And then you also get the bonus of hearing some really great talks tonight. Seriously, y'all, we have an all-star lineup. I am so excited about all three. We have Chloe Rybicki-Kler talking about navigating the retrosplenial cortex. We have Amir Bagdachi talking about the bewildering story mechanics of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And we have Eli Nyberger talking about Journey to the Center of the Sousa Lupophone. What is that? You'll find out later. But now I am very excited to welcome back to Nerd Nite to tell us more about the retrosplenial cortex, Chloe Rybicki-Kler. Chloe is a Michigan alum and a fourth-year candidate in the PIBS Neuroscience Program who focuses on a lot of things that I do not know how to pronounce, but she will teach you all about a little bit of it right now. Let's give Chloe a hand.
I am so excited and so honored to be here with these incredible public speakers tonight. And all I can really say to my fellow co-hosts, louder? Okay, we're gonna drown out that stage over there. I'm honored to be invited here by Ann Arbor Nerd Nite. And I just wanna say to my fellow co-hosts, game on. So I could talk about my research forever. And when I did my first Nerd Nite, I actually went on for about 40 minutes. So without further ado, I'm going to jump right in so we can get this done in under 20. So I'm here to talk to you tonight about the retrosplenial cortex. And I'm hoping to convince you that it's the coolest brain region to ever exist, because I think it is. Right up to my mouth? Okay. All right. So the story that I have for you tonight starts with my grandfather, this man right here. It starts with my grandfather and a box of donuts. So back in 2004, my grandfather suffered a cerebral aneurysm. Now, this happens when the walls of your blood vessels in your brain become thin. They balloon out as blood passes through, and they can cause a bleed. Now, at best, this can cause brain damage, and at worst, these bleeds become fatal. But if you know anything about my grandfather, you know that he's a stubborn man. So, within the minutes and hours following the initial aneurysm, he started to show symptoms and didn't really think anything was wrong. As he was moving around his house, he started to walk backwards. And my grandma would come over to talk to him. And as she would talk to him, at first she thought he was kind of kidding because he would talk and make no sense. And then she realized that he really thought the gibberish was a real sentence. So something was clearly wrong. But he didn't think not being able to walk or talk was really a good reason not to go to the hospital. And this is a man who is incredibly dedicated to his routine. So my grandfather, this was a Saturday, had to go out and do his Saturday routine. And that included getting groceries and getting himself a box of Entenmann's donuts. So my grandfather lives in Detroit. This is his neighborhood. And in spite of his progressively worsening symptoms, he got into his car and was able to drive himself through his neighborhood in Detroit, make all these turns, and get to the grocery store. And as family lore has it, he got those donuts and they were delicious. Unfortunately, at this point, his symptoms were becoming a lot more severe and he was experiencing some temporary memory loss. So on his drive back home, he forgot one really critical thing, and that was to close the car door as he was driving down Grand River. This man, who I am descended from, drove through Detroit eating a box of donuts with one leg hanging outside of the car. And he made it home. He made it all the way home. And what I love about this story, it is absolutely true, and he is still kicking to this day. But what I love about this story is not that it illustrates some miracle that he, survived this brain damage, but that part of his brain was working exactly as it should be. And that's the retrosplenial cortex. So what is the retrosplenial cortex? I'm sure you've probably never heard of it because I hadn't when I started grad school. And it's actually this kind of tiny, unassuming brain region here in purple. And I had a good friend who actually works with me now ask me, well, why do we study it? It's so obscure. No one really knows what it does. And that's a really good answer in and of itself to study something. But also it's important to know that fundamentally its function is to help us make maps, save them, and then use them to navigate our everyday lives. And, her rejoinder was, well, okay, but there are already areas of the brain that do memory work that we know about, that we can ask cool questions about. There are other parts of your brain that help you figure out where you are in space. But the retrosplenial cortex is really cool because it sits at the apex of all of those other pieces of information. The retrosplenial cortex is where navigation really comes together. And before I get into what it is exactly that I study, I want to talk a little bit about how we know that you're able to sense where you are in space in the first place. So this piece of information actually goes back to Darwin. Darwin loved to study the behavior of birds. And he observed a pattern of behavior that gives enormous insight into what we now know about how your brain creates its sense of space. And he called this phenomenon the dead reckoning. So to introduce you to this concept, I'm first going to introduce you to the Arctic tern. This is just an incredibly cool species of bird. It's a migratory bird. Among its coolest attributes is that it can sleep while it flies. It can eat while it flies. Now, if we could find a way to sleep while we eat, or eat while we sleep, I'd be sold. They also go silent before they start migrating. And some brilliant ornithologist called this trend the dread. And we'll get back to that in a little bit. But anyway, they're a cool bird. Before you know what I think is the coolest fact about them, and it's that they have one of the longest migratory paths of any bird known to man. They travel 18,600 miles annually over the course of about 12 months. And they don't just travel this distance, they travel it while flying above the clouds. So you have a bird that's making an enormously complex trip up and down. They're actually found on every continent in the world, and they will nest in every nation. And so you have a bird that is able to do this without any landmarks to guide them. They have no visual input. They have nothing that they're hearing that's telling them where to go. And what scientists have figured out, now these birds don't have retrosplenial cortexes. And in fact, only mammals do. So reptiles and birds have sort of a proxy region. But below that, they do have something that we all share, which is a thalamus. And so these birds are actually able to navigate by internally keeping track of the length of time, the speed that they're moving, and every turn that they make. So all of this navigation that they're doing is embedded in their brains as a sequence. And they can draw on this sequence without needing very much of any other information to get where they're going. And so to dig in a little bit further into how they do this, I also want to introduce you to one of my favorite studies of all time by the Toby Lab in 1995. So you have a lot of different cells that are all responsible for one tiny piece of information. And this is really how the brain gets done what it needs to get done in a really proper and efficient way. So there are cell populations that might encode just the boundaries of the space that you're in, or just, certain points in space where you are. And these are very conveniently called boundary cells and place cells. But there's another region of the brain called the thalamus that Toby thought was probably responsible for keeping track of your head direction. So what they did was implant a small electrode into a living rat and record it moving in an arena. Now, this was a blank arena. There was nothing there to indicate where the rat was in space. But when they recorded, what they found was that as the rat moved past a certain point, a small subset of cells near that point would fire. And they did this again and again with other placements of the electrode. And what they discovered is that you have a small population of neurons in every single person's brain here, in every mammal, that encodes exactly one direction in space. So if I move this way, I have one subset of cells firing. And if I move a tiny bit this way, it's a different population of cells in the thalamus. And in fact, they did something brilliant and hooked this up to a speaker. So you can hear that neuronal population fire as it's reacting to the environment. This is one of the coolest studies in existence. I encourage you to see the video if you get the chance after this. But this is really foundational work for what we do, because we know that your body is able to encode head direction with enormous precision. So back before I joined the lab that I work with Dr. Omar Ahmed, two incredible scientists, Dr. Ellen Brennan and Isabella Cape, were just sort of digging around in the retrosplenial cortex. They were doing what we call characterization of neurons. So they were making small electrical recordings of living cells and trying to figure out who's sitting here and why. And they stumbled on what I think is a pretty incredible finding. So normally in your brain, about 9 out of every 10 cells is excitatory. And that's a big generalization for the few neuroscientists that I see here. But that's the general rule. And so their firing pattern looks something like this. When neurons fire an action potential, it creates a change in membrane voltage. And all you really need to know is that it creates a pattern kind of like this. And excitatory cells do this really cool thing when they fire an action potential in the cortex, and it's called adapting. So you can see here that the first action potential and the second action potential are really close together. But after that, the interval kind of starts to get wider. And I like to think about this as listening to your really weird uncle. So everyone here probably has some weird uncles. And there's one who always has a lot to say, and you kind of go along with it for the first few minutes because you're like, oh yeah, okay, hi, Uncle Steve. And then you drift off. And so, your attention is waning. And that's kind of how these cells are reacting. They have an initial response to input that then goes on as they continue to get this input to kind of get softer. Now, the key thing that Ellen and Isabella found was an excitatory cell that should have behaved like this, but instead failed to adapt. And it has a couple of other key electrical features that I won't go into right now. But you can kind of think of this cell as listening to your weird quiet uncle who always maybe has something really gross or exciting or both to say. And so you're constantly leaning in. You're constantly paying attention to what your weird Uncle Doug has to tell you about his hernia, right? And so this is what these cells are doing. And to really double down on this point, they were able to do something incredible, which is to fill these cells and actually create a real reconstruction of what they look like. And you can see that they're pretty starkly different shapes. And that means a lot for what they studied next. So they had these cells. They knew that they were probably doing different things with the information that they were getting. But then they wanted to know, okay, who's talking to them? So they injected a virus into their brains and were able to use it to trace which brain regions were talking to which cells. And so these two very different excitatory neurons are neighbors. They sit side by side. But what they found is actually happening is that the regular excitatory cells are getting a lot of information from brain regions that are involved in, your rumination, your thinking, sort of complicated awareness tasks. The low Rio-based cells, these careful listening cells, almost exclusively get information from the anterior thalamus. This is the same region that we were having that we found had direction cells early on, 1995 and before. So all of a sudden, we have a cell that's really good at listening closely and is probably exclusively getting information from the same brain area where we have a cell that's all about vestibular information. So really, the icing on the cake for this study was this mathematical model that I can see a bunch of people's eyes glazing over. I get it. I was an English major. I'm still an English major at heart, and I love this math every day that I see it. So we have a graduate student named Samir in our lab who is able to take the electrical information that we record and plug it into a mathematical model to create an ideal neuron. So it's a neuron that only exists within the computer and is an idealized version of what we know to be true. So then what he did, and this just impresses the hell out of me every time I look at it, is he plugged in two variations of this cell. One where it acted exactly the way we knew it to act, and one where it acted like its other adapting cousins. And what he found was that if our low Rio-based neuron adapts, it's not able to respond to the way that we know head direction cells work. They send a lot of information constantly and really fast. And if LRs were adapting, they wouldn't be able to keep up. They would just kind of sputter off and, you'd be walking around in circles all the time, really confused. So what our model shows us is that low Rio-based neurons are perfectly primed to encode nothing but head direction. And I'm just like, this is so cool to me. Oh my God, we have a circuit that tells us where we are in space. And, we can now build on this and figure out, okay, well, how do we make a map? How do we remember a map? How do we draw on a map? But I'm a big electrophysiology nerd. I dream about ion channels, and I wish I were kidding. But what that brings me to is my favorite slide of all. So what? So we study the electrical properties of these cells. We know they tell us really cool things, maybe about how we start to generate maps. But for most people, you're not going to be living and breathing neurons every day. Well, this brings me to Glen Campbell. And I know there are exactly 2 people in this audience who probably saw him in my description of my talk and thought, yes. So these next 3 minutes are for you. If you're not familiar with who Glen Campbell is, he is a country western singer who passed away in 2017 from complications due to Alzheimer's disease. He is an incredible musician, or so my dad has led me to believe. And he was also part of the Wrecking Crew, which was an incredibly influential session musician group that influenced so many albums in the 1960s and 70s. So he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, I believe, around 2011. And he decided to put on a farewell tour and document it as he was in decline. And if you watch this documentary, as I have had to several times, you'll notice that he starts to lose focus of where he is on stage. And at one point, he actually forgets his own lyrics. And so as he's forgetting his lyrics, the crowd starts to join in and encourage him. But the thing that really stood out to me is that through all of this, he's able to strum perfectly. He remembers every note until his last concert. His ability to play his guitar has not changed. And what I'm really getting at here is that Alzheimer's as a disease doesn't come in one fell swoop. These symptoms are coming at different points in time and affecting you in different ways. But what's really interesting is that we know of many clinical studies that show that one of the very first symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is spatial disorientation. So people who are diagnosed with this illness report that they get lost in familiar spaces before any other symptom starts to appear. That's kind of crazy, right? Because we've just been talking about a circuit that helps you find your way in familiar areas. What's even more amazing, though, is that we have something called lesion studies that allow us to study how a brain region operates or affects behavior when it's been damaged. And lesion studies show us, I know this is a lot of text, sorry, I'll give you the TLDR. When you damage the retrosplenial cortex for another reason, people still get lost. In the same way that people with Alzheimer's disease report losing their way in their homes. And as an added, not bonus, but kicker, when people receive damage to the retrosplenial cortex, they also report something called anterograde amnesia. If you've seen the movie Memento, it's like that, but with less writing. And so people are unable to create new memories. And if you have a loved one with Alzheimer's disease, you might notice that they're a lot better at recalling older events than newer ones. So bringing all of this together, studies that we've actually known about for the last 20 years show that people with Alzheimer's disease have impaired function in their retrosplenial cortex. And I know this is kind of a heavy place to end on, but the point that I want to bring us back around to is that the retrosplenial cortex is cool in its own right as an evolutionarily very important brain region, but we're starting to think it might also be a really good candidate for targeted therapies for diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. We have a region that hasn't been receiving very much interest, but has really great potential for therapies and to help people live better longer. And so I'm hoping I'm within time. I'm a little over, but it was worth it. Before I go, I'd like to thank the incredible people that I work with in my lab. There are too many to count, but these 4 especially, Tyler, Isabella, Ethan, and Isaac, are the dream team of Slice electrophysiologists. They say no to nothing, and that's not always a good thing, but they're just the best people in the world to work with. So with that, I have time to think, about 2 really short questions. So thank you. Yes, sir. How do I see the therapies working with this? I can't answer that, but be on the lookout in the next year. We may be able to tell you more then. That's about as much as I can say right now. Yes. Did you ask if all the deficits exist differently? Oh, is there a sex difference in humans? You know, I study mice, I don't study humans, so I don't have a great answer to how they change. I will say that I have known a number of women in my life who have passed away with Alzheimer's disease, and yeah, it's so hard to say. It affects people differently, and I think the most important thing really about longevity is making sure that everyone gets an equal level of care. Having a family support system makes a big difference in how your symptoms progress. I hope that answers your question. Yes, one more. How did you go from English to this? Ooh, spite. She asked how I went from English to being a neuroscientist. Everything I've done in life was because someone said I couldn't do it. So that's my encouragement to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Fantastic. Woo! Nice job. Thank you. Nobody asked, but in case you want to know, my favorite Glen Campbell song is Galveston. If you haven't listened to it, do yourself a favor. And if a little tear happens to come down, brother, I'm right there with you. My name is Sarah. I am Emily's co-host here at Nerd Nite. Thank you again to Chloe Rybicki-Kler and her excellent job. And thanks to all of you for coming on out. We are very excited to have you here. And I'm going to keep things rolling along the Nerd Nite train here and introduce our second speaker. We are going to dive into story dynamics and why the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears structurally shouldn't work, but absolutely does. What a banger. I mean, come on, Goldilocks, everybody. So please join me in welcoming to the stage. He is a writer. He is a comedian. He is the host of the Moth Story Slam here in Ann Arbor, Amir Bagdachi.
Thank you. Let's see. Oh, oops. How do we get some slides going? Just keep going? Ah, marvelous. All right. Thank you all. So, what qualifies me to investigate deeply into the story mechanics of Goldilocks and Three Bears? The answer is absolutely nothing. I am no more qualified than all of you. We all know this story equally well, which is we know it extremely well. This is one of the most well-known stories in the English language. I have no advantage. We are all, in some ways, experts in the Three Bears. It's an extraordinary piece of culture in our civilization. It's never not been relevant in the 200 years that it's been around, at least. And I know it's had changes forms over that time, right? So judging from the look of some of you in the audience, I can definitely say that for you, the Three Bears is a foundational text in cottagecore. In fact, for many of us, it's the first cottage we ever heard of, right? Is the cottage and Three Bears. And actually, just as recently as last year, in the Hollywood Reporter, which is the Hollywood trade magazine, they had this headline last fall: Reese Witherspoon is developing a Goldilocks and the Three Bears movie. Okay, think about this. Reese Witherspoon is planning a movie about a young woman who commits criminal trespassing and wantonly inflicts damage on other people's property, right? Obviously, I would see this movie. We would all see this movie. And I think you can agree with me, the only possible title of that movie is Illegally Blonde. This is not the official poster. I'm working on myself. I'm just pitching some ideas. I see it as part of the Cocaine Bear extended universe. So this story, Three Bears, is very familiar to us, right? So familiar that I will bet you every single person here in this tent could tell this story. What's more, actually, every single one of us would tell the story in just about the same way, with the same emphases in the same places, with trying to take the same voices. That is extraordinary, right? That wouldn't be the case for if we all tried to tell Snow White or Goldie or Cinderella or Princess and the Pea, right? We come close, but it wouldn't be as the same as the Three Bears. And yet, something about it is puzzling. And one of those things is, what's it all about, right? Other stories that Goldilocks is usually bundled with, they have clear meanings. So, what is the meaning of the Three Little Pigs? We all know it. It's work hard, and if you take a break, you will be killed, right? And that's why we teach it to children. What is the moral of Little Red Riding Hood? It's maybe you should visit your grandma more often, at least often enough to know what she looks like, right? That's a clear moral. But what's happening with the Three Bears? Scholars have wrestled with this for a very long time, honestly. They genuinely have. In fact, famously, Viennese psychologist Bruno Bettelheim grappled with the Three Bears, and he decided that the answer was ultimately Oedipal. He said that it is hard to come closer to a girl's Oedipal wishes than by suggesting that Goldilocks tries to share bed and board with a father figure. And I think we can all agree that as an analysis, that is pretty weird. It's pretty weird. It, in fact, inspired another scholar in the 1970s, Alan C. Elms, in the Journal of American Folklore, to go dig deeper into some interpretations. And he wrote an article, Three Bears, Four Interpretations, in which he walked through many interpretations, including Bettelheim's, rejecting them, ultimately landing on his own interpretation, the Three Bears, an anal analysis. Instantly, you see the problem. This could be shortened to analysis. This, in fact, inspired me to write my own important article. Has anyone checked on Alan Elms? Now, Goldilocks and Three Bears, incredible story, right? Incredible story. It is so relevant, so interesting, but today we're going to talk about the meaning. We're going to talk about a different element of this story, which is its structure. I love stories. I host a storytelling slam. I write stories for the screen. And the thing about it is that whenever you try to write a story, if you ever tried this, there's lots of advice all around you. Everyone has the golden rules of storytelling, the eternal rules of storytelling, MFA programs, book editors. Everyone wants to tell you what the rules of storytelling are. And what I'm going to tell you tonight is that Goldilocks and Three Bears does not care about your rules. And it is just fine without your rules. Okay? That is extraordinary about it all. It's very empowering. So we're going to talk about the many rules that this story wantonly violates and gets away with. Now, of course, that story is famous for violating a number of other rules that aren't storytelling related. One of them is the second law of thermodynamics. We need to get this out of the way because we teach this to children all the time, and yet it is flagrantly wrong. Very easy. I'm not a physicist, clearly. But basically, second law of thermodynamics, hot stuff gets cooler unless something happens to it, right? So if you've got 3 bowls of porridge, they're all too hot. They're all the same temperature, right? So after a bit of time, you could imagine that the bigger bowl is going to still be warmer than the middle-sized bowl. The middle-sized bowl has less porridge in it, so it's going to cool off a bit faster, okay? Not a problem with that. So far, Three Bears is on the right track. But if the middle-sized bowl is already too cold, there is no way that the smaller bowl can warm up. And yet we tell children this all the time, like, yeah, we're not even going to talk about that part. Three Bears doesn't care about your laws of physics. It even breaks those, although it's technically impossible to break any of them. So a couple ground rules as we begin our investigation here. What's the edition we're going to look at? Well, by and large, we're going to be using the edition, the Three Bears, in a little golden book. A lot of you either know this, or if you haven't seen it, it feels like you already have. It's a classic. It's from 1948. It was illustrated and put together by Fyodor Rodzinkovsky, a Russian. And as a Russian, as you can see, he has an intimate knowledge of bears and not even remotely acquainted with comfortable beds. Goldilocks' bed is supposed to be just right. Her legs don't fit through the end. So that's our standard reason. So let's roll into kind of the first rule of storytelling that Goldilocks does not care about. And that's the hero must be likable and worthy. This is a golden rule. Everyone will tell you this. I'm sure Pixar will tell you this. Hollywood will tell you this. There's a famous screenwriting book called Save the Cat that says your hero, no matter what they do later on, should do something worthy up front, like saving a cat, so we know that they're the good guy in this story. Now, I know a lot of you are like, yeah, but come on. It's 2023. We are so gritty now. We are so dark with our binge watching series. We're into cool, dark heroes. Actually, you'd be surprised how enduring this rule is. So take, for instance, Michael Corleone. We love Michael Corleone, right? We have no problem rooting for someone who's clearly a criminal. We think, yeah, we love anti-heroes like that. But what's the first thing we see Michael Corleone do? Who is he when we first see him? Do you remember? A war hero, exactly. What could be more worthy than a war hero bringing his girlfriend to a family wedding to meet the family? That is very worthy. Even The Godfather follows this rule. Breaking Bad, before Walter White is a drug lord, he's an inspirational high school teacher, right? That is very worthy. And even in Tarantino movies, the first time we see John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson in Pulp Fiction, what are they doing? They're not killing people. They're discussing the legality of hash in Amsterdam and very relatably discussing McDonald's. Right? So this rule, very pervasive, even now. Goldilocks does not care about it. What's the first thing we see when we meet Goldilocks? It's this. That same morning, a little girl named Goldilocks was walking through the woods. She came to the Three Bears' house and she knocked on the door, but nobody called, "Come in." So she opened the door and went in. The word "so" here is doing a lot of work, right? Just what? Who does this? This is not normal. This is not normal under any circumstance. This is not worthy. Good people do not do this in any circumstance. There is no context. She does it because she wants to. It is so disturbing, actually, that I sought some medical expertise to try to contextualize this. And I went to health.clevelandclinic.org/sociopath personality disorder, just to get a better grip on what's going on here. According to the Cleveland Clinic, this is from their website, these are the traits of a sociopath. Let's see how many match Goldilocks. Not understanding the difference between right and wrong. Not respecting the feelings and emotions of others. Check. Being callous. Double check. Arrogance. Absolutely. Violating the rights of others through dishonest actions. Yeah. See porridge. Impulsiveness. Risk-taking. Yeah. Difficulty appreciating the negative aspects of their behavior. Folks, no question. Noted sociopath. Noted sociopath, right? We 100% know what we're dealing with here. That is what's going on with Goldilocks. No context at all is ever given. This leads us to the next rule of storytelling, which I hear so much. I'm in storytelling circles. I hear a lot of stories. I read books about storytelling. Everyone agrees that good stories must have stakes. Every creative writing teacher will teach you, okay, but what are the stakes in this story? Every Hollywood executive will say, this is good, but can we raise the stakes? Stakes means, what is our character going after, and why do we care that they need to get it? Why do we care about Goldilocks? What is she after? Answer, nothing in particular. She could stop at any time and we'd be fine. What's on the line for her? Nothing. Nothing. She's just going in because she feels like it. And that's incredible. This violates the most basic of rules. And yet this story is obviously very interesting. How does it do it? Okay. Now, you may think you know, but actually it's more interesting when we slow it down. It generates tension in threes, but maybe not in the way you think. So we all know there are 3 sets of 3 when she walks in, right? 3 bowls of porridge, 3 chairs, 3 beds. But pay attention to what happens in each set of 3. The pattern actually is uncomfortable, uncomfortable, comfortable. Uncomfortable, uncomfortable, comfortable. And what that does is it creates in our brain this desire to get to comfort. It's tension, tension, release the tension, right? This is so much the case that it actually rewires our brains, regardless of what Chloe will tell me otherwise, so that we totally refigure our sense of morality. Let me prove it to you, okay? I'm going to read the first part of this story. You all are going to shout the last two words in this segment. She tried the porridge in the big bowl, but it was too hot. She tried the porridge in the middle-sized bowl, but it was too cold. She tried the porridge in the wee little bowl, and it was neither too hot nor too cold, but... Exactly. Did you feel the release of tension? In just right. Some of you lit a cigarette afterwards. Okay? Total release of tension there. Now, notice this. What she has just done is neither just nor right. She has completely obliterated any sense of normal human morality, of ownership and property, and just done whatever feels good. She has replaced right and wrong with what feels right and what feels wrong. And it all happens to us as well. So Goldilocks in this moment has become actually an animal, because animals live by satisfaction, right? So she becomes an animal. And that's what's interesting. She is more bear than the three bears. In fact, if I were to tell you the story of the three bears and I left out the species, I go, okay, at least one of these characters is a bear. You'd be like, it's Goldilocks. Obviously, that is bear behavior. And yet somehow the bears are the more human ones, which is what makes them so uncanny and weird, right? It's like once in this story the beasts leave, the bestiality can truly begin. That's the truth of it. So we have completely ignored the idea of stakes. We've rewired morality. This leads us to another way it creates tension, because now it's off on its own. It's ignoring all rules. One of the ways it builds tension is with tension in the genre. So what is the genre of the Three Bears? Well, most of us might say, oh, it's a fairy tale, because it's usually with fairy tale stories. But it's got no fairies in it. It's got no magic in it. It's got no witches in it. It's got no princesses in it. In fact, if we look at the plot, and plot tends to be a really reliable indicator of genre, it's a story of a sociopathic intruder forcing their way into a family home. The family comes back unsuspecting while the intruder is lurking upstairs. That is a recognizable genre. That is the home invasion movie genre. Okay, we all know movies like this, like Panic Room and so on. It's an incredible genre. And in fact, just based on the facts of Goldilocks alone, if I said, oh, they're making a movie about Goldilocks and Three Bears, it's, oh, it's a home invasion movie, probably called Guess Who's Been Sleeping in My Bed? From the director of Illegally Blonde. So it's a home invasion movie. But even here, it violates the cardinal rule of all home invasion movies, which is, in home invasion movies, the intruder is inherently more dangerous than the homeowner. Okay? That's what creates all the tension. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but there's an exception here. It's Home Alone. Okay? Actually, Home Alone is the exception that proves this to be true. Because if Kevin, while he's lethal at the end of Home Alone, if he were actually more dangerous at the beginning of Home Alone than the wet bandits, Home Alone would just be the tale of a demonic child who gleefully tortures two strangers on Christmas. It has to be the case that the wet bandits are more dangerous up front, okay? So in this home invasion movie, somehow the homeowners are more dangerous. And the moment they enter the home, something happens in this story that ratchets up the tension even more. We go back to the rule of three, the three times happening, but this time the rhythm in our bodies is totally different. Pay attention to what's happening in your body, because now there is no release of the tension. Now it's, oh my God, tension. Someone's eating my porridge. Someone's eating my porridge. Someone's eating my porridge. It's all gone. Now we're even more nervous. It ratchets up the tension even more. We're now thinking, oh my God, they're gonna go upstairs, right? And in fact, I want to know from you guys, let me hear you shout if this is true. How many of you, at this point in the story, hope the bears find Goldilocks? Right, a good number of you. How many of you, it could be the same people, kind of want Goldilocks to get away with it? Yeah, a good number. That's right. It's easy to overlap this. That's because somehow in this story, in violation of every rule of Hollywood and MFA programs and Pixar, both sides of the story are the heroes of the tale. This story has split into two, where we are actually on both sides. That's extraordinary that it does that. And of course, that kind of violates another basic rule, is that the audience needs to be clear on who they're rooting for in a story. We're always told this. It should be very clear what the lines are. Even if your characters are complex, who are we as an audience cheering for? In The Three Bears, we're for everybody. It's fine, right? Now, of course, very good stories can sometimes fall prey to this confusion. We're in a moment like this right now with a really great example. There's a new Indiana Jones movie, right, in the theaters. Can anyone tell me what is the title, the exact title of the new Indiana Jones movie? Yeah, this audience doesn't know. They're at this thing, right? It's actually Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, okay? Who saw, that's the fifth one. Who saw the fourth one? You know what the title of the fourth one is? Exactly. Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. What is the title of the third Indiana Jones movie? Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. What is the title of the second Indiana Jones movie? Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. What is the title of the first Indiana Jones movie? Exactly. Raiders of the Lost Ark. No Indiana Jones. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, who's raiding the Lost Ark? It's the Nazis. We accidentally named the movie after the Nazis. Clearly, afterwards, like, we need to course correct, put the hero's name in the title as quickly as possible, because we have made a terrible mistake. Actually, we see that kind of correction happen in Goldilocks as well. So what is this? What is the title of this story anyway? Is it The Three Bears? In the Golden Book, it's The Three Bears. And in fact, originally in the first printed version, 1837, Robert Southey, it's called Story of the Three Bears. And in that version, actually, the human character is an old woman, and she is clearly marked as the villain. She suffers consequences. In one version related to this, she gets impaled on the spire of St. Paul's. But people, within 10 years, that character transforms into a young girl with different names. By 1918, it is coalesced into Goldilocks and the Three Bears in 1918 in a version by Flora Annie Steele. So this story always has been split into two parallel stories at once that we are experiencing at the same time in defiance of all rules. A story that is about the Three Bears and a story that's about Goldilocks. And really, this is kind of two different genres. One is a mystery genre, like Orient Express with Hercule Poirot. And the bears, like detectives, are studying the clues. They are able, like Poirot, to detect from a bowl of porridge that exactly one spoon has been tasted from it, right? And we're on their side. But on Goldilocks' side, we're much more in a suspense thriller. This is still from Rear Window. I'm sure many of you have seen Rear Window. This is all you need to know about it and how powerful the Three Bears is. This is the moment of Rear Window where Grace Kelly, one of Hollywood's most Goldilocks, golden of stars, right? Hitchcock puts her in a golden dress. And in this movie, moment in Rear Window, she sneaks into the apartment of the alleged killer, supposed killer, right? She trespasses into someone else's space, and she's rummaging around for evidence. And we know, from Jimmy Stewart's point of view, across the way through binoculars, that the killer is returning back to his home. The homeowner is coming back to his house to find Goldilocks in her gold dress going through the stuff. And the tension in this point of the movie is unbearable, right? Hitchcock made a career out of putting Goldilocks-type people in mortal danger. And what he's doing is learning the basic lesson in Goldilocks in the Three Bears, that we will find this absolutely terrifying. And that's extraordinary. So we're nearly toward the end of the story, right? The bears are almost there. One of the biggest rules of storytelling is, by the end, the hero must be changed by their experience. If you know Joseph Campbell's work about myth, they always say, okay, the hero must go through some transformation. But I promise you, every book editor, every story coach will say, yes, but how did this character grow and change? Okay? Well, actually, the very ending of The Three Bears is the one where modern retailers often struggle the most. They try to make the most changes because they're not quite comfortable with how it is. Here's how Rodzinkovsky does it. It's the classic ending. Goldilocks opened her eyes and she saw the three bears. "Oh," she said. Sidebar, totally inadequate response to the situation. No sense of restorative justice here whatsoever. She was so surprised that she jumped right out the window and ran all the way home, and she never saw the house in the forest again. No lesson learned, and it's all about her. All we care about is just where she is in the story. She just never thought about it again. She just never saw it. More modern tellings have really wrestled with this. There is a modern illustrator, Jan Brett. She did one set in the Arctic called The Three Snow Bears. In her version, this is toward the last end of her version, the Goldilocks character explicitly escapes through the legs of Papa Bear in a move that would be very significant to Alan C. Elms. No question, had he lived to see this version, be profoundly moved by it. Then notice what she does. She keeps going. She's like, oh, she found her dogs. She looked back to wave thank you to the snow bears. Suddenly she's learned her lesson. She couldn't see them, but she hears their voices waving bye-bye. This is severely revisionist history of this story, right? She's going through great lengths to be like, no. She learned a lesson. We all know the truth, though, right? We all know the truth that she learned nothing whatsoever. In fact, that is what happens in the entire Three Bears. Presented with 3 bowls of porridge, she discovers the first 2, no good. They don't match her size. The smallest one works best. Yet presented with 3 chairs, she's like, you know what? I've learned nothing from the previous experience. I will go for the largest one yet again. When that doesn't work, with 3 beds, she's like, you know what, though? Still, maybe the big one will work for me. This woman learns nothing. We all know what will happen at the end of the Three Bears. She'll go out and find a middle-sized cottage. And when that doesn't work, she'll find a cottage that is just right. And will she ever be caught? Will she ever be held accountable? No, because the criminal justice system does not hold blonde people accountable. And folks, that is why I strongly support expanding the Supreme Court with bears. I think we can agree. It's an improvement. If I have time for one more, do I have time for one more slide? Okay, one more slide. All right, absolutely. So, what do we learn from this story? Okay, basically, a story about a character who disregards all the rules of decorum succeeds by disregarding every rule of decorum in storytelling because it doesn't care what the rules are. It just does whatever feels just right. So if you're telling the story to a child and they ask, what's it all about? You tell them nothing. Thank you. The end.
Woo! Thank you, Amir. Ladies and gentlemen, Amir Bagdachi, come on. I must have heard that story a million times, and I didn't know I'd heard it too boring, and I didn't know I'd heard it too, I don't know, other boring. But I think we can all agree that Amir has told it just right. Thank you very much. All right, folks. We are going to take a 5-minute break while we do a little tech reset here, but please stick around because you're going to hear something that you have literally never heard before and you will never hear again unless you are around Eli Nyberger, its inventor. So please stick around. We'll be back in 5. right, folks. Come on back and grab your seats. If things have rearranged a little, grab a different seat. Maybe there's one available now. All right. Folks, the talk that we have for us tonight, it's called Journey to the Center of the Sousa Lupophone. And what on God's green earth could a Sousa Lupophone be? Friends, it is part loop pedal, part vintage synth, part Sega Genesis, and 100% pure tuba. So please join me in welcoming the hapless inventor of the Sousa Lupophone and the director of the Ann Arbor District Library, Eli Nyberger.
Today on How It's Made, Sousa Lupophones, embarrassment, and feedback. Thank you all for coming. I'm Eli. I'm the inventor of the Sousa Lupophone. We're going to talk about it today. I'm going to tell you all about the numerous mistakes that led to its creation. But first, of course, what exactly is a Sousa Lupophone? Well, it's part Sousa, part lupa, and part phone, obviously. But before we get into that, what exactly is a sousaphone? Well, a sousaphone is a tuba. It's a type of tuba, right? You all know what a tuba is. It's the lowest brass instrument. It's the one that you hug to play. And when you're hugging it, it plays very well. But when you're marching and you're supposed to perch it precariously on your shoulder, it does not work anywhere near as well. And this was unacceptable to this guy, the one and only John Philip Sousa. And he said to himself, I'm the director of a marching band, and I like tuba, and I need a tuba that my marching band can play. And if you don't give me a tuba that my marching band can play, we're going to have a problem. And so Floyd Pepper, that was actually his name, invented the first Sousa Lupophone. I'm sorry, the first sousaphone, which was a sousaphone that tuba that you would wear as opposed to a tuba that you would hold. And the rest is history. And of course, like all great stories, it's completely 100% false, because before the sousaphone, there was this crazy thing called the sax tuba, invented by Adolph Sax, better known for the saxophone. For some reason, not very well known for this. And there were also helicons and all kinds of things. And the kicker is that John Philip Sousa's band never marched with the sousaphone even once. So it's named for him. It's the predominant marching tuba, and all of its lessons are completely false. However, what makes a sousaphone? That thing, the bell that is at a 90-degree angle that lets the sound that comes out of the tuba be up above your head. And I'm realizing now I probably don't need to explain what a sousaphone is all that much, seeing as how I'm wearing one in front of all of you right now. But you take that bell, you attach a body to it, and you have a sousaphone. So where does the lupa come in? Well, this is a loop pedal. It's called a loop pedal because it's predominantly for guitar players, and you're supposed to step on it. But there's all kinds of amazing devices that you can use to record loops and make loop-based music. And of course, the king of loop-based music is the one and only Reggie Watts. He's absolutely incredible. If you're not already familiar with him, get familiar with him. He was supposed to perform at Hill just a couple of weeks ago. He canceled, but he might be coming back in the fall. So stay tuned. Do not miss Reggie Watts. He's unbelievably hilarious, ridiculously talented, and a huge inspiration to me. But who is me? Well, as I started out my musical career as a kid, my original instrument was baritone saxophone, or bari. When I was in high school, I was super into it. I did all-state band. I went to music camps. I went to jazz camps. I composed a brass quintet called Little Bunny Foo Fugue when I was 17. As yet unperformed for some reason. And then I came here to the University of Michigan, and I joined the Michigan Marching Band, and I met my wife, Deanne, of 25 years. And our son, Nemo, is now in the sousaphone section of the Michigan Marching Band. So it runs in our blood. We can't get away from it no matter what we do. Another thing that I did was the Nintendo Land Family Band was our family. We played our household covers of video game music at the Waterhill Music Festival for several years. So that was my other sort of criteria of what led me to this sad state that you see before you at the moment. So then in 2011 at Full Moon and Festivals, I saw this crazy one-man band guy. He's called the Stranario, or Il Stranario, of course. All right, and Il Stranario is an amazing one-man band. I saw him playing Shout. He was walking around on the streets. It was fantastic. I was like, that guy's awesome. Life goals. Look at him. I mean, can you imagine a cooler looking dude? Look at that. Then, just a couple years ago, I discovered this guy, Anders Flanders. And Anders Flanders is a one-man band. He's based in Sweden. He's from Sweden. He lives in the UK. And he has an amazing one-man band that's based around an accordion and a synthesizer and a vocal board controller and all kinds of stuff like that. And I thought that was super cool. I also really liked his music that he had composed with a band called Detective Buron with his brother, who you may know from this video. If anyone's familiar with the Marble Machine, yeah, that's his brother. And if you still follow the Marble Machine guy, boy, is it frustrating still following the Marble Machine guy. Anyway, so that is the idea. You take a one-man band, you combine it with a sousaphone, you add a loop pedal, and that makes a sousa-loopaphone, all right? So I had an idea, I had a germ of idea, I didn't know how to quite get there, but there was a problem. I was proposing an electronic instrument, right? Electronic instruments need amplification. They need something to make their sound be louder, right? And how was I going to do that with a fiberglass instrument? Could I suspend a speaker in the bell? Maybe. Could I hang something off my back? Perhaps. But then I discovered these things as I was searching for waterproof speakers. These are called exciters, and it's basically like a speaker without a cone. It just vibrates whatever it's attached to. A lot of people use these at home and they attach them to like a big piece of like plywood, and they make the entire piece of plywood into a giant speaker, right? So you get great sound out of it because it's very diffuse, it's bouncing all over the room, and you can use very lightweight, rigid materials, work really well. And I was like, oh, lightweight and rigid. Sounds like a sousaphone bell to me. So I had the completely awful idea to attach exciters to a sousaphone bell and see if I could make an electric tuba, which I'm about to demonstrate for you right now. Whoops. All right, here we go. You get the idea. That's all you get for now. No. All right, so it's able to amplify the horn. I'm also able to record it and loop it and play it through the instrument. So what else was I going to put on my sousa-loopaphone? Well, I needed an amplifier to drive the exciters, right? So the first thing I got was a just pretty basic Bluetooth amplifier that's right over here. And that takes the signal that's coming out of the loop pedal and driving it up to the exciters and vibrating the bell. So the entire bell is a speaker. All right. Then I added my loop pedal. This is an Electro-Harmonix 22500. It has the external loop selector, so I can choose different ones. What's really fun about this, let me jump to my right song here to demonstrate, is, let's see, number 40. I'm selecting number 40 on my dance card. So what I can do is I can put music that from recorded music and take it and put it on the loop pedal and play over it. So I can't just go, whoops. I can go like this. And I'm sure you're all wondering, how did I get here? All right. So in addition to the loop pedal, then I used the exact same vintage synth that my hero Anders Flanders uses on his rig. That's a Casio SA1. And we're going to demonstrate that in just a moment. But it's a light little battery-powered synthesizer. And so it's just a very fun little synth, makes all kinds of sounds. We'll demonstrate that in just a moment. I also added, this is an Adafruit soundboard. I'll demonstrate that in just a moment. Then we've got a Boss VE5 vocal processor that allows me to make different sounds with my voice, all right, which I will demonstrate later so that you can tell that I can't actually sing. All right. And then a microphone, which I just demonstrated there. And we took all those things and smashed them together, and the sousa-loopaphone was born. All right, so to touch quickly on just a couple of features of some of my favorite things. This is a soundboard. It can make all kinds of sounds that you load onto it. What kind of sounds should I load onto it? Well, obviously, I should put all of the sounds on it from the Smash 1989 game Toe Jam and Earl for Sega Genesis. And if you haven't played this game before, it's one of the very best Sega games by far. And I'm going to take you through, we're going to insert the cartridge. That's not literally how it works. But while I show some gameplay footage, I'm going to tell you what some of these sounds are. So first, that's the sound of Toe Jam and Earl sneezing. There's some drum sounds. There's belching, of course, lots of belching. Jamming, you can jam. There's a telephone ringing. That's the carrot that tells you what prizes are. That's a bunch of chickens. That's the flying baby who messes up your controls. That's the opera singer who I think she kills you. That's the boogeyman, of course. Evil dentist. That's the evil mailbox, etc. You get the idea. And then at some point in the game, you get on the elevator, and it goes like this. Whoop, wrong button. You get the idea. All right, so that is Toe Jam and Earl. That's what I loaded the sound card with. And then there's the amazing little synthesizer, the SA1 PCM Tone Bank from 1989. And it has one trick, and it's a really good trick, and I'm going to let it do it for you right now. Ready? Here we go. Can anyone say jitterbug? Yeah, that's its one trick. It's its demo. Of course, all great Casio keyboards have a demo, but it's really good at that. All right. Then for lighting, you can see the lighting because my first goal was to take this out at full moon. So it's got a Adafruit Scorpio controller. That's an RP2040. So it runs a version of Arduino, in this case, CircuitPython. And that's what controls the lighting that you see along there. There's also around the bell, which works really best when it's dark, some EL wire. EL wire, electroluminescent wire, has to be driven at a high frequency, high voltage. So it needs to be separated from other things voltage-wise, so we get too much noise. And obviously, we can't have noise with a sensitive and delicate instrument like this. So when we got all those things together, the only other question was, how am I going to power all this? So I have, there's 4 different voltages that all these devices require. So I have 2 batteries here in my bag, and that powers all of that. One of them is a CPAP battery. But it's great because it has lots of different voltages, and you can really count on it. So I got it all put together. I took it out on the first night of full moon. I met the Detroit Party Marching Band, a real band. I hope to be something like them someday. And that's the story of the Sousa-Lupophone. So what's next for the Sousa-Lupophone? What do I want to do next? Well, I want to change my vocal processor. The one that Anders Flanders uses is really cool, but it's kind of old school. And as you've already heard a few times tonight, I really need something with feedback protection. So I'm going to get one with feedback protection built in. Then I want to add some lighting to the bell, so there's some glowing inside the bell, or as long as just the outside. Then I want to upgrade to like Sousa-Lupophone MIDI edition, because as you're about to find out, I can't really play the keyboard either. So it'd be really helpful for me to like have that pre-recorded so that I can like play along with that. Then I want to move to the Super Sousa-Lupophone, because what I really want to do is mount an actual Super Nintendo to it and use this cartridge called the Super MIDI Pack that allows you to use the synthesizer on a Super Nintendo as a synthesizer, and that would be super cool. Then let's see. I want to see if I can upgrade to electric uke and see if I can learn not to play that either. And then also an analog synth would be a really cool thing to add on here. This is a PCM, but it'd be great to have kind of like the fat sounds of an analog synth on there. And then maybe a MIDI drum machine, so I'm not limited to those things that are all stuck in there. So with that, that's the end of the tour. Now I'm going to play you a song. And I need to first reassure you that I did not write this song, because you're all going to think I wrote this song. The song is written by an artist called Cursor Minor. And he released in 2003 this album called Library. And it's a song about going to the library. And it's a super cute, adorable video. And this CD is so old that on the CD is multimedia. And it includes both a Shockwave Flash and a QuickTime version of the music video. And most of you are like, what on earth are Shockwave Flash or QuickTime? And well, they're ancient video technologies. So with that, I'm going to get myself set up here, and then I'm going to perform The Library by Cursor Minor here for you. Just a moment. Okay, and one brief note. I have pre-recorded portions of tonight's performance for a high likelihood of success. So bear that in mind. Here we go. Hey kids, there's a really cool place you can be. Right over here. Whoops, yeah, you will see. Aha. You can learn a lot about the world that we living in your public library. The library, the library. It's the place where books are free. The library, the library. You can also rip all of our CDs. Let's go a little faster. Yeah, it's better. A lot of successful people agree. Knowledge is something that can set you free. So if you want to end up awesome like me, join your public library. The library, the library. It's the place where books are free. The library, the library. We also have a lot of DVDs with sections about almost everything. You'll always find something you're interested in. Plate tectonics or embroidery, Michael Portillo or the banyan tree. The library, the library. It's the place where books are free. The library, the library. Librarians are nice and friendly. You'll feel fine. Whoops. You'll feel fine at the library. Thank you very much. Oh, man. That went maybe 10% as good as I was expecting. Maybe 10%, maybe 15. All right, so that's my talk. I do have an encore if anyone would like to hear one other song. Okay. Just a moment again while I set up. You know, when you're a busker, you have all the time in the world, but you know, when you're on stage. All right. Okay. Let's see. Not that. Not that. There we go. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. All right. Okay, here we go. The chills that you spill up my back leave me still with satisfaction when we're done. Satisfaction of what's to come. I couldn't ask for another. Uh-oh. I couldn't ask for another. DJ Soul is on a roll. I've been told he can't be sold. He's not vicious or malicious, just lovely and delicious. I couldn't ask for another. I couldn't ask for another. Grooves in the heart. Groove is in the heart. Groove is in the heart. What's happening? What's happening? Oh no! Stop it! Abort! Abort! Where's the power switch? Oh, that was close. I think we'll call it a night on that note. Thank you all very much for coming to Nerd Nite. I have one more thing to show you, and that is for those of you trying desperately to write down the letters off the back of my shirt. Here they are. 1,000 points. Here I am, SG. That's the code on my shirt. You don't have to hunt me down all the rest of the summer. You can text that into the library and get your points. Thank you all for coming and indulging me. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Eli. And I have to request, add a list of lullabies to that list, because the dancer I'm carrying, big Sousalupophone fan. And I'd like to ask all of you to put Wednesday, July 12th on your calendar. I know I know you're really here for the points, but I'm pretending you're taking the pictures for Wednesday, July 12th, which is our next Nerd Night. It'll be out on the patio at York, a great place to be. And I want to see every single one of you there. And then come back every month. Thanks so much for coming, and we'll see y'all next month.